I'm Cavan Holt. Most folks around here know me for keeping my head down, working hard, and showing up when it matters. I'm not the loudest voice in the room. I don't need to be. For 15 years, I've managed multi-million-dollar projects, kept every deadline, never asked for favors. My record's clean, my hands are steady. I've always believed that if you just do what's right, the world has a way of honoring that. But life doesn't always follow the rules we set for ourselves. I wasn't planning to tell this story. I figured some things are best kept tucked away, like old family photos in a box under the bed. But there are moments that won't stay buried, moments that dig their way back up and remind you who you are and what you've lost. For me, it started with a lock. Just a simple chain and padlock across the gate to the one place I thought I could always call home. It didn't feel like much at first, just a question hanging in the air. But it's funny how one small thing, one detail that doesn't fit, can shift everything you thought you knew. So here's how it went. The truth, plain and steady. There's a certain silence you only hear in the early morning at the edge of a forest. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, but one that hums quietly with life. Wind shifting through the trees, distant calls of birds waking up, the creak of old wood settling beneath your feet. That's the sound I woke up to every summer morning at our family cabin, or at least it used to be. I remember gripping the steering wheel, watching the gravel crunch beneath my tires as I turned onto the old, familiar path. The cabin sat nestled at the end of the lane, half shadowed by towering pines, its porch wrapped in sunlight like an old friend reaching out for a handshake. The place hadn't changed. The same weather-beaten wood, the same green trim my grandfather insisted on painting himself every other year, even when his hands shook too much to hold the brush steady. Except this time, something was off. The front gate had a new chain and padlock, and nailed to the fence, where the mailbox used to sit, was a wooden post, empty but for faint markings of where a sign once hung. I didn't need to guess what kind of sign it had been. I parked and stepped out, gravel crunching beneath my boots. The air smelled the same, pine, earth, the faint scent of the lake just beyond the trees. But I stood there staring at that chain, knowing without knowing. This wasn't right. I pulled out my phone and called my father. "Hey, Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "You changed the locks on the cabin?" A beat, then two. His voice came back casual, too casual. "Oh yeah, we had to. Couple of repairs to do. Better safe than sorry." Repairs? I frowned. Since when do we lock up for repairs? And the sign. There was a sign here, wasn't there? He hesitated again. "Just routine stuff, Cavan. Nothing to worry about." But something in me twisted tight. That knot in your gut that tells you you're standing on the edge of a cliff and the ground beneath you is starting to give. The cabin wasn't just a building. It was the closest thing to an heirloom our family had. My grandfather had built it with his own hands. My father, my brother Liam, and we'd spent summers here, fishing, splitting firewood, racing out to the dock at dawn. It wasn't just four walls and a roof. It was the place that held all the versions of myself I'd ever been. And now there was a lock on the door, and my father's voice didn't sound like I expected it to. "I'll come by this weekend," I said, forcing a smile into my voice. Dad chuckled thinly. "Not much to see, son. Just a mess inside." But I already knew. I knew something was off. I knew that just a mess meant more than broken boards or leaky pipes. I walked back to my truck, rested my hands on the steering wheel, and stared at the cabin for a long time before I turned the engine over. I drove away slowly, taking the long route through town, passing by the familiar diners and gas stations. People here still nodded at me like they always did, but something had shifted. When I got back to the city, I sat at my kitchen table for hours, scrolling through real estate listings in the area, looking for something I hoped I wouldn't find. But I did. There it was, tucked away on the third page. Private cabin, lakefront property, fixer-upper, pending sale. I blinked at the screen, rereading the words over and over like somehow they'd rearrange themselves if I stared long enough. But the details were all there: square footage, lake access, that unmistakable photo of the sagging front porch, the paint peeling just like I remembered. Pending sale. I called my father again. This time my voice shook. "You sold the cabin?" Silence on the other end. No excuses this time. No casual brush-offs, just a heavy pause before he finally said, "It's complicated, Cavan." Complicated. That word again. The word people use when they're trying to avoid telling you the truth. When they want to make it sound like the problem is too big for you to understand. "How long?" I asked. How long has it been on the market? He sighed. 3 months. 3 months. I'd been working 16-hour days, managing a multi-million-dollar project, flying back and forth across the country, trusting that the one place I could always come home to was still there. It wasn't. I thought we agreed, I said quietly. The cabin was supposed to stay in the family. Dad's voice softened, but not in a way that comforted me. Your brother needed help. His divorce, it's been hard. Liam, of course. The golden boy. Always the one who needed saving. The one whose mistakes cost the rest of us. You sold the cabin for his divorce settlement? I asked. Though I already knew the answer. Dad didn't respond right away. We had to make a decision. It was the only way. I sat there feeling the weight of that statement settle over me like a blanket of wet concrete. The only way. Funny how people who make decisions without you always find a way to call them necessary. Ever found out something important was taken from you without a word? Sometimes the biggest betrayals come quietly. What would you have done in Cavan's shoes? I've always been the type to believe in handshakes, that a word given is a word kept. Maybe it's how I was raised. Maybe it's just who I am. Either way, promises meant something to me, until the day I realized not everyone holds them as sacred. The night I confronted my parents about the cabin still feels like a film reel playing in slow motion. The clink of cutlery against porcelain, the hum of the old ceiling fan overhead, the sound of my father clearing his throat one too many times. I walked in with the weight of that real estate listing heavy in my chest, but I tried to play it cool. Smells good in here, I said as I set down the bottle of wine I'd brought. Mom, you always know how to make roast chicken just right. She smiled that soft, worn smile that always used to put me at ease. Oh, it's nothing special, Cavan. Just a little rosemary and patience. Patience. A word I was clinging to harder than I realized. We sat down, plates full, the conversation winding its way through familiar, safe topics, weather, work, Liam's ongoing divorce. But all I could think about was that listing, pending sale, right there in black and white. No amount of chicken or small talk could make that go away. I waited until the plates were half empty, until my father had poured himself a second glass of whiskey. And then I laid it on the table, as steady as I could. So the cabin's pending sale, I said. Not a question, a fact. The clatter of my mother's fork against her plate echoed in the silence that followed. My father's glass hovered midair before he set it down with more force than necessary. I told you, he started, his voice already defensive. It's complicated. That's not what I asked, I replied, keeping my tone even. I asked why the cabin's for sale at all. My mother wiped her hands on a napkin, her gaze dropping to the tablecloth. We didn't want to worry you, Cavan. You've been so busy with work. So busy that I wouldn't care about losing the one place that meant something to all of us? My voice rose, sharper than I intended. Dad leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands clasped like he was about to deliver a sermon. Your brother's going through hell. You know that. The divorce, the settlement. It's taken everything. And you decided the cabin was the solution? I asked. Without telling me. He needed help, Mom whispered. And the cabin? Well, it's just a place, Cavan. Places can be replaced. Those words hit harder than any punch. Just a place. Just the walls that held every summer memory, every lesson learned at the end of a fishing line, every story told by the fire when we thought the night was ours alone. Funny, I said quietly. Grandpa never saw it that way. That made Dad flinch, just a small tick at the corner of his eye. But I saw it. Grandpa had built that cabin with his bare hands, driving nails with the kind of precision that only comes from knowing something will outlast you. He'd always said the cabin would stay in the family, passed down like a legacy, a place we could always come back to. Your brother needed it more, Dad said finally, shrugging like it was that simple. The air in the room shifted, heavy, thick with something unspoken. And what about what I needed? I asked, my voice lower now. What about the fact that I've been the one keeping things steady, the one who's never asked for anything? Dad shook his head. Don't make this about keeping score, Cavan. But that's exactly what it felt like. A silent tally I never wanted to keep, but one they had been marking up for years. Did you even think about asking me, I pressed? Or did you just assume I'd understand like I always do? Mom reached out, resting a hand lightly over mine. We didn't want to burden you. You've always been so good at handling things on your own. I pulled my hand away. That's not a compliment, Mom. That's just a way to excuse leaving me out. Dad exhaled slowly, reaching for his whiskey again. Look, the deal isn't final yet. The buyer's still reviewing things. Maybe there's a way to work something out. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. Maybe there's a way to fix this. The thing is, I wasn't sure I believed that. But sometimes you have to say the words out loud just to keep the ground steady beneath your feet. We finished dinner in near silence after that. The roast chicken sat cold on our plates, untouched. The clink of silverware felt louder than the words we didn't say. When I stood to leave, Dad walked me to the door. His hand rested briefly on my shoulder. "I hope you can understand one day," he said. I looked him square in the eye. "I hope you can." I spent the drive back home with the windows down, the wind scraping against my thoughts. This wasn't just about the cabin anymore. It was about trust. About the quiet kind of betrayal that doesn't scream in your face but settles in your bones, where it's harder to shake loose. The next morning I called a friend in real estate, a guy named Miles I'd known since college, sharp as a tack and twice as fast when it came to property deals. "Need a favor," I told him. "Name it," he said without hesitation. "I need to know everything about that cabin sale. Buyer's info, timelines, any loopholes." There was a pause on the line. "Cavan, you thinking of making a play for it?" "I'm thinking," I replied, "about not letting something that matters just slip away. Because sometimes, when the people closest to you forget your worth, you have to remind yourself. And maybe, just maybe, remind them too." Ever had someone tell you it's just a place when it meant everything to you? Sometimes it's not about the thing itself, it's about what they thought you'd accept losing. Curious, what's one thing you'd never let go of without a fight? There's something about betrayal that sneaks up on you. It doesn't roar in like a storm. It creeps, slow and silent, until one day you realize you've been standing in the rain without a coat. I used to think I could handle anything as long as I kept moving. Stay busy, stay focused, and nothing can touch you. But some things slip through the cracks no matter how tightly you hold the pieces together. I'm Cavan Holt, the reliable one, the steady hand, the man who always shows up, always fixes the problem. But what happens when you're the one broken? When the problem is something you can't patch over with hard work or a little extra effort? I didn't sleep the night after that dinner. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, hearing every creak of the old apartment walls. My mind kept circling back to one thing my mother had said. It's just a place. And no matter how many times I turned it over, I couldn't make sense of it. The cabin wasn't just a place. It was the summer I learned to fish, standing knee-deep in the water while my grandfather showed me how to tie a line. It was the sound of rain on the tin roof, the creak of the floorboards under my feet, the way the sunset hit the lake just right every evening. You don't sell something like that without thinking twice, unless, of course, you never really saw it the same way. I found myself scrolling through the listing again, fingers hovering over the image of the cabin, the peeling green trim that Grandpa had loved so much, pending sale. The words sat there, mocking me. I called Miles first thing the next morning. "Anything?" I asked as soon as he answered. "Yeah, I got something," he replied, a little too cautious for my liking. "The buyer's local. Name's Ethan Price. Owns a couple of rental properties in the area. He's not just looking for a getaway spot. He's planning to flip it." I felt my jaw clench. Turn it into another vacation rental? That's the idea. Paint it up nice. Throw it on Airbnb. I let out a slow breath, trying to keep the frustration at bay. I could already see it. The old cabin gutted and dressed up in trendy farmhouse decor, strangers sleeping where my family once gathered, treating it like a weekend novelty. The thought of it made my stomach turn. "Can you set up a meeting with him?" I asked. Miles hesitated. "Cavan, he's got no reason to meet with you. He's got a deal on the table already." "Tell him I'm interested," I said firmly. "Tell him I'll make it worth his while." Miles sighed. "All right, I'll see what I can do." I hung up and stared at the phone, feeling the weight of it in my hand. I wasn't just fighting for a building. I was fighting for a piece of myself that I wasn't ready to lose. But as the hours passed, the anger faded into something colder, something heavier. A kind of numbness that settled in my chest and wouldn't let go. I went to work, answered emails, sat through meetings, but I wasn't really there. My body showed up. My mind was somewhere else entirely. Later that night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, a glass of whiskey in my hand, staring at the dark reflection in the window. I thought about calling my father again, demanding answers, but what was the point? They'd made their decision. They'd sold the cabin out from under me and justified it in the name of family. Liam's name kept echoing in my head. Your brother needed help. I'd heard that before. when he dropped out of college, when his business failed, when he got arrested for driving under the influence and Dad bailed him out without blinking. Every time Liam fell, they rushed to catch him. And every time I stood on my own 2 feet, they barely noticed. I set the glass down harder than I meant to, the sound sharp against the quiet. Why is it always me who has to understand? The thought burned in the back of my mind. I'd been the one who worked, who saved, who never asked for anything. But when the time came to make a sacrifice, it was always my share they put on the table. The next day, Miles called back. Price agreed to meet, he said, but he's not looking to back out. You'll have to come in high. I'll handle it, I told him. Cavan, I know you're attached to this place, Miles added, his voice softer now. But don't let this eat you alive. It's just, don't say it. I cut him off. Don't tell me it's just a place. He was quiet for a moment. All right, I'll set it up. We arranged to meet Price at a local coffee shop near the lake, the kind of place where the coffee's overpriced, but the view makes it worth it. I got there early, sat by the window, watched the water ripple in the breeze. When Price walked in, he looked exactly like I expected, polished, confident, the kind of man who saw opportunity in nostalgia. Cavan Holt? He asked, extending a hand. I shook it, feeling the firmness of his grip. Ethan Price. We sat down, ordered coffee, and danced around pleasantries for a while before I cut to the chase. I'm interested in the cabin, I said. Whatever you're offering, I'll beat it. He leaned back, eyes sharp. You know it's pending sale, right? The paperwork's almost done. I know, I said, but I'm asking you to reconsider. He smiled, a little too smooth. And why would I do that? Because that place isn't just another property, I replied. It's a piece of my family. My grandfather built it. My father sold it without my say, but I'm here now. Price studied me for a moment, then shrugged. Look, I get it. Sentiment's nice, but business is business, and I'm not in the habit of walking away from good deals. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. I'm not asking for charity. I'll make it worth your while. He paused, tapping his fingers against the table. How much are we talking? I named a number. Higher than I wanted, but lower than I feared. Price raised an eyebrow. That's generous. It's personal, I said simply. He nodded slowly. I'll think about it. As he stood to leave, he offered a parting glance. You know, Holt, not many people fight this hard for a piece of land. It's not the land, I said. It's what was promised. And that was the truth of it. This wasn't about square footage or property lines. This was about holding on to something that should have never been put up for sale in the first place. Sometimes the fight isn't about winning. It's about proving to yourself that you're worth standing up for. Ever had to fight for something no one else seemed to value? I'm Cavan Holt, the steady hand, the one who never makes waves. That's how they've always seen me, the one who doesn't need help, who doesn't ask for much, who quietly shoulders what's left behind when others fall apart. But I've come to learn there's a difference between being steady and being silent. One earns you respect, the other makes you invisible. The morning after my meeting with Ethan Price, I stood at my kitchen window watching the city wake up. The streets buzzed with life, people rushing to work, coffee cups in hand, the endless grind rolling on like nothing had changed. But something in me had shifted. I wasn't sure if I was angry anymore, or hurt, maybe both, maybe neither. But I knew one thing, I wasn't done. I called Miles again. Morning, he answered, voice thick with sleep. You're up early. I need another favor, I said, ignoring the edge in my voice. Shoot. I want to know every property Ethan Price has bought or sold in the last 5 years, and who he's worked with. There was a pause. You thinking of getting into the flipping business? Not exactly, I replied. Just want to know who I'm dealing with. Miles grunted. All right, give me a day. I hung up and leaned against the counter, staring at the cold cup of coffee in my hand. This wasn't about revenge. I wasn't trying to tear Price down. I just needed leverage, a way to tip the scale back in my favor. I'd spent too long watching things happen to me. It was time to make something happen for myself. The thing about rebuilding is it doesn't always look like progress. Sometimes it's just gathering information, making quiet moves, laying the groundwork for something bigger. I started reaching out to a few people in town, old friends, business contacts, anyone who might know something useful. I kept it casual, light, but every conversation built a clearer picture. Turns out Ethan Price wasn't as untouchable as he looked. His flipping business had a few cracks, a couple of lawsuits over zoning violations, Some unhappy investors whispering about shoddy renovations and deals that went sideways. Nothing big enough to sink him, but enough to know he wasn't bulletproof. Miles called back that evening. "Got your info," he said. "Price is stretched thinner than he lets on. A couple of his properties are sitting empty longer than they should. If the market dips, he's exposed." I felt a flicker of something that almost felt like hope. "Good," I said. "That's something." "Cavan, you sure about this?" Miles asked, softer now. "You don't have to play dirty." I leaned back in my chair, running a hand through my hair. "I'm not playing dirty. I'm just playing smart." He sighed. "All right, just don't lose yourself in this." I knew what he meant, but sometimes holding on to who you are means doing what you've never done before. A week passed before Ethan Price called me back. "Still interested in that cabin?" he asked, voice cool as ever. "Depends," I replied. "You ready to talk numbers?" He chuckled. "I might be. Things have gotten a little complicated on my end." I didn't press. I let him come to me. "I've got some other properties in play," he continued. "If I can offload one, I might be willing to let the cabin go, but I won't take a loss." "I didn't come here to lowball you," I said. "You know my offer." There was a pause. "Let me get back to you." I hung up, feeling the tension coil tighter in my chest. This wasn't over. Not yet. That night, I sat at the bar down the street from my apartment. Just me and a whiskey, nursing it slow. The place was half empty, the hum of conversation low enough to let your thoughts wander. I thought about calling my father again, about asking him one more time why he never thought to include me. But I knew how that conversation would go. He'd defend his decision. He'd say it was about family, about sacrifice, and I'd be left holding the same hollow answers. I turned the glass in my hand, watching the amber swirl. "You all right, man?" The bartender, a guy named Chris, leaned against the counter, eyeing me with that mix of curiosity and concern. "Yeah," I lied. "Just thinking too much." Chris nodded. "Well, you're in the right place for that." I smiled faintly. "Ever feel like you're fighting for something no one else thinks is worth the trouble?" Chris shrugged. "All the time. That's life, right? Fighting for stuff other people walk away from." I tipped my glass toward him. "Yeah, that sounds about right." The next day I called Ethan Price back. "I want the cabin," I said, "and I'm ready to close fast." He laughed. "I figured you might be, but I've got another buyer circling." "I know about your other properties," I cut in, my voice steady. "I know about the vacancies, the lawsuits. You don't need another fight right now." Silence. "I'm offering you a clean-out," I continued. "No hassle, no bad press. Take the deal, Price." He exhaled slowly. "You're sharper than you look, Holt." "I've had to be." Another pause. "All right," he said finally. "We'll make it happen, but I'm holding you to your number." "You'll have it by the end of the week." I hung up, letting the weight of the moment settle over me. I'd done it. The cabin was mine again, or it would be soon enough. But the victory felt hollow, because no matter how many papers I signed, the truth remained. I shouldn't have had to fight for this at all. Fighting quietly isn't the same as backing down. Sometimes the strongest moves are the ones no one sees coming. Ever had to make a play like that, silent but sharp? I'm Cavan Holt, and for the first time in my life, I held the upper hand. Not because I fought harder or shouted louder, but because I stood my ground when they expected me to fold. The cabin, the piece of my family they thought they could barter away without consequence, was back where it belonged, in my hands. But peace doesn't come easy, not when the people who hurt you don't even know they've drawn blood. I signed the paperwork with Ethan Price in the back of Miles's office, my name etched into the deed where my father's signature had once been. Miles clapped me on the back after we sealed the deal. "You finally did it," he said. "How's it feel?" I sat there a moment, staring at the black ink on white paper. I expected relief, maybe even pride, but what I felt was heavier, harder to name, like reclaiming the cabin only underlined what I'd lost. "It feels unfinished," I said. 3 days later, the first crack appeared. It was a Sunday evening. The air was thick with the scent of rain coming in off the lake, the skies darkening. I was on site at the cabin, walking the perimeter with the contractor I'd hired, a no-nonsense woman named Dana with sharp eyes and a sharper sense of timing. "We can bring this place back to life," Dana said, tapping one of the porch posts with her clipboard. "But it's going to take some serious work." I nodded, taking in the sagging roofline, the chipped paint, the way the years had worn down the place like waves on rock. "Whatever it takes," I told her. That's when my phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. Cavan speaking. Cavan, my mother's voice, soft but with an edge beneath it. We heard some things. Is it true? You bought the cabin back? There it was. No preamble, no lead-up, just the first ripple on what I knew would become a wave. It's true, I said, a pause on her end. I could hear the faint clink of dishes in the background. She must have been in the kitchen. We thought the deal was final with price. I made him an offer, I replied. He took it. Another beat of silence. Why didn't you tell us? I laughed, low and bitter. Like you told me when you sold it? She sighed. Cavan, you have to understand we were trying to help your brother. He's always in need, I cut in. I know. That's when the second call came in. Liam. I let it ring twice before answering. Hey, Cav, he started, voice just a little too easy, like we'd been catching up every week. I heard you pulled the cabin back. Good move, man. What do you want, Liam? A chuckle on the other end. Straight to it, huh? All right, I've been thinking. Maybe we can work something out. I mean, it was supposed to stay in the family, right? I could... No. The word came out sharp, steady. Come on, he said, trying to soften his tone. I'm not asking for much. Maybe just a share? You know, split the time, maybe rent it out together, cover some of my... I cut him off. You didn't fight for it, Liam. You didn't care enough to ask until it was gone. There was a pause. That's not fair. I felt the heat rise in my chest. Isn't it? You let them sell it to clean up your mess. Now that it's back, you want to cut? His voice hardened. It's our family's place, Cav. Grandpa meant for both of us to have it. That stopped me. For a moment, I felt the old pull of guilt, the voice in my head telling me to be reasonable, to make space. But then I remembered the way my name had been left out of every decision, the way I'd been treated like a bystander to my own history. If Grandpa meant for both of us to have it, I said quietly, he wouldn't have given me the key. Liam didn't answer right away. I could almost hear him calculating, working through how far he could push. I'll take that as a no, he muttered. You can take it however you want, I replied, and I hung up. That night I couldn't sleep. The rain came down hard, hammering the windows. I sat at my desk, thumbing through an old box of papers I'd kept from the cabin. Receipts, fishing licenses, faded Polaroids. At the bottom was a letter, Grandpa's handwriting. I unfolded it, the paper soft at the creases. It wasn't addressed to anyone, just a note he must have written in his later years. The cabin is more than wood and nails. It's where you remember who you are. If you ever forget, come back here. Listen to the trees. They'll tell you what matters. The words blurred at the edges, not from tears, I wasn't crying, but from something heavier than that, something like knowing I'd been carrying the weight of that promise long before I realized. The next morning I drove back to the cabin, the ground still damp from the storm. I walked the perimeter again, this time slower. I could almost hear Grandpa's voice in the breeze, the way he used to tell stories that made the world feel bigger and smaller at the same time. Dana showed up not long after, boots splashing in the mud. We've got a timeline, she said, handing me a clipboard. 6 weeks if the weather holds. I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. I was thinking about what came next, not just rebuilding the cabin, but what to do with it once it was done, how to honor what it had been without letting it become just another property. Think we can make it feel like home again, I asked. Dana grinned. We'll make it better. And I believed her. Sometimes the hardest part isn't fighting for what's yours. It's refusing to share it with the people who let it go. Ever had to draw a line that felt too sharp but too necessary? I'm Cavan Holt, and I've learned that sometimes reclaiming what's yours doesn't feel like victory. It feels like standing in the ashes of something that should have never burned in the first place, and deciding not to rebuild it the same way. 6 weeks passed in a blur. The cabin, once weathered and weary, stood tall again, its green trim fresh, the roof solid, the porch inviting like it used to be. But it wasn't the same, not entirely. Dana and her crew worked miracles, sure, but this place held more than wood and nails. It held history. It held promises made and broken. The day of the reopening, the sky was clear, the lake still as glass. We set up a small event. Nothing fancy, just neighbors, old family friends, folks from the town who remembered what this place had meant. There were folding chairs, iced tea, a few local musicians strumming on the porch. It felt right, simple, honest. I stood off to the side as people arrived, watching them take it all in. Some of them had spent summers here decades ago, some had only heard the stories, but they understood. This wasn't just another cabin on the lake, it was part of the community. That's when I saw them. My parents. They stood at the edge of the crowd, hesitant, unsure. My mother's hands clutched at her purse like it held all the words she couldn't find. My father stood stiff, jaw tight, eyes scanning the place like he wasn't sure whether to admire it or resent it. Liam wasn't with them. I didn't know if that was a blessing or just another fracture. They stayed outside the circle of people, hovering in the background as if the weight of their choices kept them from stepping closer. Dana caught my eye, raising her eyebrows. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, though the word felt thin. "I'm fine." But my hands were clenched tighter than they should have been. I moved toward the porch as the last of the guests settled in. Cleared my throat. I'm not much for speeches, but some moments need words. "Thank you all for coming," I began, voice steady. "This cabin has stood on this land for 3 generations. My grandfather built it with his own hands, believing it would be a place for family and community. Over the years, it's held more stories than I can count. And today, I'm proud to say it's back where it belongs. Not just with me, but with all of you." I glanced toward my parents, letting that settle. I didn't need to call them out. The weight of omission hung heavy enough. "I'm opening this place up," I continued, "not as a rental, not as a business, but as a space for the community, for gatherings, for kids to learn to fish like I did, for people to come and remember what matters." There was a murmur of appreciation, a ripple of soft clapping, but my eyes stayed on my parents. My mother wiped at the corner of her eye, dabbing quickly as if she could erase the emotion before it showed. My father shifted his weight, shoulders tight, but his gaze didn't meet mine. After the crowd settled back into their conversations, I stepped down from the porch and walked toward them. The air between us felt thin, fragile. "You did a good job with the place," my father said finally, voice gruff but softer than I expected. I nodded. "It wasn't easy." He glanced around, hands on his hips. "Looks like Grandpa would have approved." My mother stepped forward, voice low. "We didn't know. We didn't realize how much it meant to you." I let that hang, because it wasn't true. They'd known. They just didn't believe it mattered enough to stop. "I'm not here to argue," I said quietly, "but I'm not here to pretend either." My father's jaw tightened. "You think we were trying to hurt you?" I shook my head. "I think you were trying to save Liam, again, and I was just easy to leave out." My mother flinched at that, but she didn't deny it. "We're family," Dad said, as if the words could fix it. "Family doesn't always mean standing in the same place," I replied. "Sometimes it means knowing when to stand apart." They didn't respond. There wasn't anything left to say. I turned and walked back toward the cabin, feeling the weight lift with every step. Not because the hurt was gone, but because I'd stopped carrying their part of it. Later that evening, after the crowd had thinned and the sun dipped low over the lake, I stood alone on the porch. The breeze was soft, the kind of quiet that settles into your bones. Inside, Dana finished cleaning up, humming some tune I didn't recognize. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old key Grandpa had given me all those years ago. The brass was worn smooth, edges dulled by time. I hung it on a nail by the door, right where Grandpa used to keep it. It wasn't just a key to a building. It was a reminder of what was worth holding on to and what I could let go, because the cabin didn't need to be a monument to the past. It could be something new, something better. Weeks passed. The cabin found its rhythm again. Kids came to learn how to cast a line. Families gathered for bonfires. The old walls filled with new laughter. I never heard much from Liam after that. Maybe it was better that way. My parents sent a card once, a simple note that said, "We're proud of what you've done." I didn't know if they meant it, but I kept it tucked away in the drawer by the door, not out of spite, just as a marker of where things stood. I stood on the porch one morning, coffee in hand, watching the mist rise off the lake. A peace I hadn't known in years settled in, and I realized something. Winning isn't always about what you gain. Sometimes it's about what you refuse to lose, your voice, your place, your dignity. And I hadn't lost any of that. I've learned that reclaiming something important isn't about revenge. It's about respect, not just from others, but for yourself. I fought for that cabin because it was a piece of me no one had the right to give away. Sometimes we have to stand firm, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it means setting boundaries with the people we love most. Now I'm curious. Have you ever had to fight for something that others didn't understand? Something that mattered only to you? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share where you're watching from or how this story resonates with your own journey. And if this story touched something in you, consider subscribing to the channel so we can keep sharing these conversations that matter.